you mentioned there was a resistance that you had, or some fears that you had that prevented you from converting. Talk a little bit about some of those fears, because I have no doubt a lot of people who are in a similar position right now that you were in, years ago. It is probably going to resonate with them. What were some of those fears, and how did you ultimately overcome them to move into the direction that you're in now?
Well, so I guess the biggest thing was this, when your profession is your ministry, that's more than just having a job. That's like your identity. And for me, so that was my identity. I was the youth pastor. My youth group was blowing up. It had gone from like 12 kids to like 250 kids. So I'm seeing all this fruit from this ministry happening. It's going great. And this was my job. I had, I was married, I had little kids, and I just couldn't comprehend what life would look like practically if I quit my job and became a Catholic. Like, what am I going to do? I mean, I'd finally finished college, I just finished that, but my education was in ministry. I had no other real skills. And this is what I felt like I was put here to do, was be in ministry. So to me, I was terrified that this could be true. Yeah. And I didn't even discuss this like with my wife. I wasn't telling her I was feeling any of this stuff, because I just wanted to stuff it, because I didn't want it to be true.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be Catholic. I didn't want that to be reality. So when I started to have these feelings of maybe this is true, what am I going to do? I just ran from them and I stuffed them, because I couldn't imagine giving up everything that would cost me at that time. Now, I was a lot younger back then, and I point to that as one of the pivotal moments in my life where I feel like I didn't make the right decision. And we walked through some pretty heavy stuff in life after that, for years. And it wasn't until many years later, probably, 20 years, 10, 20, 15 years later, where I was not 20, man. Okay. Let's say 15 years later, where I was in a better place, a more mature faith in my faith and in my life, where I had seen what happens to you when you willingly say no to God. And I'm like, no, I can't deny this anymore. And then there was some other stuff that happened with the Virgin Mary that like went around all these other objections that I was having. And then I just kind of was like, nope, I got to do this. That's later in the story, but
what was there a catalyst event or something, or was it just this obviously gentle calling? Like for my wife actually ended up coming into the church at some point too. Much to my surprise, to be honest. Whole different story, but one of the pivotal moments for her, and she grew up in an evangelical church, and one of the pivotal moments for her was she was going through RCIA just to learn about the church. She felt the need to it. And there was a retreat, and she did her first confession. And she's like, after that confession, I don't know why. She's like, I was not planning to go to the church. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming sense that I needed to do that. And even up until her confirmation and everything, like on Easter Sunday, on the way to the church, I was like, give me 3 reasons why you want to do this. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, I just want to make sure that you're not just doing this for me. Like this, what are the reasons? And she had reasons, and it was incredible. I could have planned it better myself, obviously, but
that's awesome.
There was like a pivotal moment. Was there anything like that for you that was like an experience or a conversation or something?
Absolutely.
That was like, okay, let's do it. Yeah.
Well, there were several things, but there was one in particular. So, I didn't tell you this, but back maybe a year after I met Devin, maybe 2 years after I met Devin, he invited me with a friend of ours, or his friend, I should say, invited me along with Devin and a few others to go on a pilgrimage to Rome and to Medjugorje. Okay. Now I'm Protestant pastor, know nothing about the Virgin Mary, know nothing about this and that, but he invited me to go on this trip. So I said, okay, I'll go, because I thought a free trip to Europe, I'm going to go. And when I got over there, I learned a couple things about Catholics on that trip that really stuck with me. The first one was that I learned that Catholics love to party, but not like in a bad way. Like I saw the Catholics on this trip just interacting and enjoying this different. It just seemed like a different level of fellowship at a church level that I'd seen, and it just really hit me. And then I saw, because I didn't understand any of the stuff about Mary, When I was over in Medjugorje, what I saw over there were Catholics worshiping Jesus through this devotion to Mary. And I didn't get any of that. Like, that was completely foreign to me. But when I was there, I saw it firsthand.
Yeah.
And I saw how much these Catholics love to pray. They love to go to mass. They love to fast. They love to do all this stuff. And it was all sort of through their relationship with the Virgin Mary that brought them closer to Jesus. See, I always thought it was like that the Mary stuff took you away from Jesus. And what I saw on that trip was that it was driving them even more towards Jesus. So that's sort of in the back of my mind. Well, then years later, I am working in my Methodist church. My denomination is in shambles because liberalism is overtaking the denomination, just like it's done to a lot of the other mainline denominations, where they're starting to fracture over different issues going on in the culture. And I was really wrestling with that because I was, I wanted to be a Bible-based, on fire evangelical Christian. And I'm having all these conversations and arguments with my, colleagues in ministry, or the pastors, whatever, who are like on the other side of these issues. And I'm trying to argue from the scripture. And they're saying, well, that's your interpretation of the scripture. What about, what makes your interpretation? And so then I'm having to appeal then to the tradition of the church and say, well, this is what the Christian church has taught for all these years. Now I'm kind of wrestling with this because I'm like, well, which church, And they would say to me, well, the church has been wrong for all these years about these things, just like they were wrong about women in ministry and slavery and all these things they would point to. So now it's our job to reinterpret things and correct them. And that just didn't sit well with me. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't just go back and undo 2,000 years of Christianity because it suits your opinion. So then we start talking about authority. And again, I found myself in a similar situation where I'm at this meeting with a group of pastors, and I'm sitting with this guy who's like the dean of a seminary, a very conservative evangelical United Methodist, which sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but he's like the one guy who's in charge of this thing, and he's going to help us navigate through these waters. And I'd never met him before. I just heard him speak, and I'm wrestling through some of these issues. And I asked him, I said, hey, if we don't have an objective source of authority beyond the scriptures that can help us navigate through this conflict, what are we supposed to do? How do we find our way through it? And he turned to me and he said, well, it sucks to be Protestant, doesn't it? And then he laughed and finished eating his sandwich. And I was just like, oh man, because another person had challenged me and said, Keith, if you believe all this church authority stuff and history of church, why aren't you Catholic? And I was like, oh man. And all these things started getting churned back up. Well, right around this time, my friend Greg, the same one who took me to Europe all those years before, he said, hey, I want you to come see this movie with us. So my wife and me and his wife and him, we went to go see this movie, Apparition Hill, which was about Medjugorje, which I hadn't thought about that in years. And when I went to see this movie, it just sort of churned all this stuff back up in my mind again about the Blessed Mary and everything and the church. And I wasn't really like going there. But one thing that happened to me was I was asked to preach a sermon in my church in Advent that year. It was 2016 in Advent about the Blessed Virgin Mary when she receives the news, basically the Annunciation, when Gabriel comes to her and is going to tell her about this, this miraculous birth that she's going to have. So I'm in my office and I'm writing this sermon, Josh, and no joke, this is crazy. I was literally overcome with emotion. And every time I would start to like write something and think about the Virgin Mary and read the text and all this stuff, I felt like this presence. I felt like this emotion. I started to cry. I'm there in my office and I'm writing this. And never, like when I would think about her, I just would be overcome. And when I got up to preach that sermon on Sunday in our church, I felt more on fire preaching that sermon, which was all about how Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant. Mary is the new Eve. I went through the greeting, hail full of grace. I went through all of that. I went through all of the things how Mary is the woman in Revelation 12, how she's the woman that was spoken about in Genesis 3:15. All these things. Basically, I preached like a Tim Staples apologetics on the Virgin Mary sermon, and I had no idea. I wasn't reading all these Catholic sources. I wasn't like, it just was stuff I was discovering, looking through things. And it was incredible. I felt the Holy Spirit and I felt her. And my church was like, whoa, we've never heard this before. They weren't like against it. They weren't saying to themselves, oh, wait a minute, Keith, you can't preach this. This is Catholic. Because I never said, well, this is what the Catholic Church says. I just preached it.
Yeah.
So what started to happen was she began to move around whatever objections I had left in my mind and around whatever fear I had, and started to just come into my experience, and it was like this weird relationship. Well, the final thing, and this is, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back, was I'm wrestling through all this stuff and I'm feeling in my heart like, okay, I'm feeling like Catholicism is the truth. And this time I'm talking to my wife about it. We're having these conversations and we're wrestling through stuff. I'm in a lot better place in my own maturity at this point in time. And I'm wrestling through things. We're talking through things and I'm feeling like, okay, I don't know if I can stay Methodist anymore, but what am I going to go do? I was seeing that all the problems that we were having in our denomination were the same root of the issue of authority with anywhere I would go. And I'm really struggling, man. I'm praying. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I'm really feeling led to become Catholic. And I remember I was talking to my dad about it one time. And he said, Keith, you can't just become Catholic. You can't, there's got to be a way. Like you can't, like you're in ministry, you have a family, you have a mortgage, you have obligations. This is who God's called you to be. For you to be Catholic, like there's got to be a way. Something that you can't just quit your job and go work at Walmart or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm wrestling with that. Well, I woke up one morning and as I'm praying in my devotions, like I felt the Lord say to me in my heart, he's like, you need to get a hold of Steve Ray. Okay. And I'm like, Steve Ray. And I didn't know Steve Ray.
Yeah.
He's just a guy that I'd seen on YouTube, like so many others, because I was watching videos, I was devouring content at this point in time.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know where he lives. I don't know anything about Steve Ray. I guess I'll have to think about that. Well, that day I was going to have dinner with my friend Greg, the same Greg who took me to Medjugorje, took me to, all the stuff. He was one of the guys that helped me. And we were going to have dinner together in a town about 40 minutes. We live about an hour and a half away from each other. We were meeting in the middle. And we got to this little burger joint. And I had said nothing about the whole Steve Ray to anybody. He walks in before he can sit down. His phone goes off and he goes, oh, I just got a text from my wife. Here's what it says. Tell Keith Steve Ray is going to be in Milan, Illinois tonight giving a talk. You guys should go. I was like, oh, dude. And then I told him what happened. I said, that was something that I heard that in my prayer life this morning. I've got to go. We've got to go. So we just went. We drove about an hour to go to this thing with Steve Ray, and I'm feeling like this has to be legit. So we walk into the church. They're having mass. I'm going in, and by this time I'd been going to daily mass. I'd been kind of like walking that road, just sort of like feeling that pull, but just still wrestling with some of that fear, Josh. I go up and I get my blessing. I step aside, I kneel down. I'm looking up at the crucifix and I say this prayer with kind of that idea that my dad had said to me about, I need a way here. And I looked up at the crucifix and I prayed. I said, Lord, if you want me to become Catholic, I will become Catholic, but you have to make a way. And Jesus spoke to me and he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't need me to make a way. You just need me. And at that moment, that's when people are still receiving the Eucharist. And I'm like, I need him. I can't put all these conditions in front of my obedience. I can't say, okay, well, I'll follow you if you do X, Y, Z for me.
Yeah.
I just need to step into it. So then Steve gets up and gives this amazing talk about how the early church were willing to die rather than give into the culture and worship pagan idols. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh man, they're willing to die for their faith. I'm not even willing to get a different job. So that night driving home, I told Greg, I said, that's it, man, I'm doing this. And I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea what was going to be. I got home. I told my wife, I said, look, I need to become Catholic. I need to do this. And I don't know what it's going to mean for us. I don't know how we're going to live. I don't know how we're going to survive. I don't know what we're doing. And she just said, well, okay, if that's what God's calling us to do, then I guess that's what we're going to do. And she wasn't feeling that way. She wasn't like on this quest towards Catholicism, but she was like, okay, if that's what God's calling us to do, then okay. So the next day I went in and I told my boss, my senior pastor, I said, I gotta become Catholic, and that was in the spring of 2017.
Wow.
And then my last Sunday there, it was, I didn't want to leave these guys high and dry. I stayed with them for a couple months after that. But my last Sunday there was the day we broke ground on our brand new $9 million facility that we were building. Our church was growing. It was an awesome church. I loved the people there. I loved my pastor. I loved my relationships. I loved what that was made it difficult. It wasn't like I was like, all right, see you later. It was hard, So I come into the church. October 8th was the day that we picked. I didn't do RCIA. I just met with my priest. And we decided, I said, what do I still lack? And I'm like, I'm ready to do this. And he said, let's just pick a day, Keith. So I'd been meeting with him weekly for a few months, and we picked October 8th, this random day. And that Sunday I went up and got my confirmation, received first communion. And then when it was time to pass the peace, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it was Steve Ray standing there. Now, Steve lives in Michigan. I live in Iowa.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to be in town that day, giving some talks, but I didn't know he was going to be at our church. I still never talked to him, well, that's not true. I did talk to him, but before that on the phone once. I called him because he gave me his number that night. But I had no idea he was going to be at that mass or anything like that. And it just to me, it was like full circle, God just going boom. And he said to me, welcome home, brother. You'll never look back. And the rest is kind of, we went from there. It's just been an incredible journey. So I know that's a long story, but those are pivotal moments that to me are like the key thing.
Wow. Keith, that's incredible, man.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for checking out this clip from the Practical Theism podcast. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to check out the full episode, you can do so by finding it on our YouTube channel. Definitely consider subscribing and ringing that little bell so you can continue to get updates and notifications when we release new episodes and new clips just like this one. I hope to see you soon.